Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free, but there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver Eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Take a look around, kid. What do you see? Homes being foreclosed. People working 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and still drowning in debt. Don't get me wrong. This country was founded on great ideals and principles. They've all been ruined by the banks. Open your eyes to banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the machine buster of all time. Yes, the story behind the story. Welcome once again. Ladies and gentlemen, golly, gotta give a big shout out to all of our friends and listeners in the islands and lands supposedly down under, right? The land of the far southern hemisphere. Our friends in New Zealand, those listeners, of course, are loyal listeners in Australia. And there we just give a big shout out to you. We welcome once again to the show the our wonderful co-host now that fills in so admirably for me in the absence of Alex and others. Well, I have to do my other job and my full-time job, traveling around the country and talking to folks. Major Burdock, thanks again for filling in. And hello.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
We've got again, you're loud and clear, pushing the full decibels. Thank you so much. Oh, golly, we got a great guest tonight, and I before I bring him on and introduce him, I'm assuming he's on the line, ready to go.
I am.
Yeah. So we'll introduce our special guest, but I got to give a shout out again to all the listeners with 8chan. Golly, how's it been going over there in the Philippine Islands, Major?
Oh, that's great. It's just another beautiful morning over here, Saturday morning. We like to. This is always such a great way to start my weekend morning over here. So always enjoying it. We had just a tumultuous week. I mean, wow. If there's a little spot in the show later on where we need some updating on some of these things, I mean, I can come in and pretty much segue in with some of the current news, but we want to keep focus at the moment. So
we do.
We are simulcasting through the studio here, and we're just so happy that we're able to do this.
Well, great. And those of you that don't know, that are first-time listeners to the story behind the story, Major is a major component of what's called 8chan, if not the founder of 8chan, and the.
No, sure. I have to step in on that. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Goldwater.
The Goldwater,
which is the news division of 8chan. 8chan has been around a lot longer than I have, so.
Thank you.
That is the deep dark. This is where everybody goes. It's the last bastion of free speech. I'm the editor-in-chief of the news division called thegoldwater.com.
Okay, I got some wrong information. I apologize for that. Somebody was telling me that you were starting out with the 8chan before you formed the Goldwater, but that's cool. Always, don't believe everything you're told. That's the lesson here, okay? Don't believe everything you may have been taught in school. Golly, we talk about this all the time, Major, and Alex, our host. I got to just again briefly give you an update, listeners. I received a phone call from Paul Kangas. He's the attorney. He's a medical doctor, actually turned private investigator, working for an attorney who has represented Alex with some great news. There was a jury trial held for Alex on the charges of terrorism, right, and threatening people, which was this big charge that could have sent him away for a long time. And it was guilty or not guilty on all charges. The jury was stumped. They were saying there's no evidence there that's really viable other than he's acting pretty weird. And so the jury was presented with the evidence that, look, there was no alcohol involved. There's no drugs. He did take the drug testing when he was arrested. And there's no reason for it other than what I explained to Paul Kangas. And he was like, really? You think there's directed energy weapons that can actually be tuned to make people's mind and ability change to act and make them act like they're inebriated? I said, I'm here to tell you, Mr. Kangas, yes, and yes. And I can prove it. Here's all these patents from Hendrik Kuslu and other people that have been assigned to people at the Presidio area, not the least of which, we don't want to name names at this point, but I'm telling you, check it out. And this is, I'm the only thing to me that makes sense, because I've known Alex for a decade. He's hot-blooded, as you know, Major. You've met him. But his heart is in the right place, I submit. He's kind of like sometimes like a bull in a china shop, but sometimes you need that. You know what I'm saying? You need to have a little bit of ferocity. And yet he's always been respectful and, listening. He listens well. And that is not the Alex that appeared, as you know. It's just bizarre. It's just a bizarre change of personality. Rule
Alex
out.
Duder is a true gentleman and a friend, and he has a very unique opinion, and he really is passionate about what he believes in. But at the end of the day, the behavior that they're describing is not him, and again, the behavior up until just shortly before that was not him. I can attest to that, and I've known him for quite a long time. He's been a very, very dear friend for a long, long time.
Yes, and so good news is he has to. There was the violation on his prior. He pleaded guilty, took some probationary time for a much, or I don't know how many years, maybe a decade or so, on a drug charge. That he said, I made a mistake. I admit it. I fess up to it. But I didn't understand that I couldn't own a firearm. I thought it was only during my probation. But it was forever, and he didn't understand that, didn't get that clear to him. So that was an honest mistake. Because when they came in and did the search warrant on his apartment, they found a pistol that he'd had for years. It was unloaded, he was for protection. He says for protection of his private holdings, which is kind of American right to protect yourself. And that he wasn't using it or threatening it with any way, but they only found it upon the search warrant. So he has to serve a 6-month thing on a separate charge. He should be out by the end of October. Okay, so that's really good news. And the attorney that represented him took it without needing a fee or a retainer, evidently. So there is a bill pending for his services after he gets out. I think we need to try and raise some money for donations to help him out with attorney's fees. We can do that in a separate show. But I wanted to give an update on that. It's good news. We've been praying for Alex, knowing that it's an unjust situation going on there, and there's a lot of people that have sent me texts, emails, even fax that people wanting to donate their services, an attorney, et cetera, et cetera. It's been very, and it's from this show. It's from the people that have listened to the show for years and years have known Alex to be a bulldog and a good investigator. But let's go on. Let's move on with what our guest brings to us tonight. Let me give an introduction. I'm sitting here holding in my hand an incredible book that was partly authored by our guest tonight, Mr. Attorney Sterling Harwood. He's penned 2 chapters in the book. It's simply entitled The Question Mark, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. But it also deals with such things as the Beatles. Yeah, the Beatles, folks. Not just those insects, the rock band, the Beatles, right? The Holocaust and other mass illusions. It's an incredible read. I've read the book. Wow, it's got some good stuff in it. Jim Fetzer, Dr. Jim Fetzer, also a host on the Revolution Radio, does a fantastic job as an investigative journalist and reporter. He's largely his writings, his compilation. The editor's Mike Palasek. But Sterling Harwood is our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Harwood, Professor Harwood, I should say, earned his JD, his Juris Doctor from Cornell Law School. Yeah, the Ivy League, man. Cornell Law School, and his PhD, his doctorate in philosophy from Cornell University. So he has a Juris Doctor as well as a doctorate in philosophy. I don't know if that's kind of dangerous, a philosophizing attorney, but we'll ask him about that. He practiced law in and around San Jose, California for almost 20 years, folks. He earned his tenure as an adjunct professor at Evergreen Valley College after teaching at Cornell Law School and Lincoln Law School, San Jose State University, and Illinois State University. He's an author, folks. His books include the title Crime and Punishment with Michael J. Gore, published in the year 2000, Business, as ethical and business as usual, 1996. He's got I can go on and on. Without further ado, welcome to the story behind the story, Professor Harward. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, True. I appreciate it. I've already learned a few things from your show. Not reading the little bio there, blurb, but I know Paul Kangas actually a bit, and spoken with him. And I didn't know he had that medical background. I didn't know he was involved in this case with Alex that you had mentioned either. So I'm already learning things. Thanks so much, and thanks.
Wow. Wow. Well, you had some interaction with Alex. Remember with that? It wasn't pleasant. Alex.
Yeah, he was a rough crowd of one, as I recall on the email.
He has very zero tolerance with and that's Alex's personality. He says what he says. And like I said, a bull in a china shop goes forward and doesn't care about the wreckage in many cases. But like I said, he's usually based on very sound principles of logic, and yet he can be a little bit more tactful. I've counseled him. I says, be a little bit more tactful and a little bit more forgiving, and you might go a lot further. But yeah,
he did give me a chance. He said, read Ed Hendry's book, The Greatest Lie on Earth, and then get back to me. So that's keeping me busy. It's quite a long book, but I haven't quite finished it cover to cover yet. But he said, get back to me when you finish reading that book, and then you'll be ramped up enough to talk to me more profitably.
Wow, I should have filled you in perhaps on what was going on. I didn't know you had known Paul Kangas and that, because I had some long talks with Paul about Alex's case. Paul, being the background of his of medical, he said, I've witnessed people that have suddenly come up with brain cancer having extreme personality swings in their behavior. And gave an example. He says, I personally think that could be what's going on with Alex. I said, well, okay, let's rule that out. Let's have him be checked while he's in, because he has good medical care there in the jail. Let's rule that out. And it's funny because he brought that in, and Alex was mad about it. He bristled. I don't have a brain tumor, and he wrote me a blistering letter, as only Alex can do. Come on, you're not a doctor. You're not a medical doctor. How dare you say that I have a brain tumor? I never said he did. I'm just saying that your investigator thinks that's a possibility, and I say we got to rule it out, among other things. Okay, there's no alcohol involved. There's no drugs. So why the personality switch, Alex? Why the extreme anger and slurred speech and yada yada yada. So anyway, if you could touch base with Paul Kangas, Sterling, man, that would be awesome. You're right there, and you both can talk the language as attorneys can talk. Man, I'd love to see what you think about this. So,
sure. I don't practice anymore, so I can't give any legal opinions, but I can shoot the breeze fairly well on political topics, whatnot, and these larger issues about mind control weapons and so forth. They actually had one on the nightly news years ago. They showed it against a bunch of troops, our troops, American troops in Iraq. They pointed some weapon at them, and they made them feel hot and bristly and sort of itchy, and agitated them from a distance. And the soldiers were acting as you'd expect them to act. We don't have visual here, but it did work at a distance. And then we've been hearing about these cases in Cuba, and I think they've been found elsewhere, if my memory serves, where people have been deafened with some sort of weapon. And there was a story about that, the follow-up story that came out a couple of weeks ago too, where they confirmed that there was some sort of attack going on. And so that's pretty disturbing that they can do that from a distance, or maybe even through walls and whatnot.
There is a U.S. Army document that I was quite prevalent over the internet quite a few years ago. I'd reported on the story behind the story about that. The paper is simply silent weapons for quiet wars, and it talks about the PSYOPs division of the U.S. Army and really the U.S. Navy's intelligence division, and the section of that quiet weapons dealt in abstract form with weaponry that was developed to not only cause death of targeted individuals, I mean assassination, that would basically imitate a stroke or a massive heart attack, right? But specifically discrediting individuals that may be deemed a threat to the state by causing them to have a mental and emotional changes that are quite drastic. And that's what I'm talking about here. Okay, they don't want to hit Alex Studer, for instance. He's really a small fish in their big scheme. They don't want to kill him. They just want to discredit him and ruin his name, I submit.
And maybe they want to experiment on him. You might want to experiment on a small fish to see how your weapon works before you scale it up and work on some other target. But I know when Ted Kennedy was diagnosed with brain cancer, and then around the same, I remember reading that, and they said there were only a couple of ways that they knew of that you could get brain cancer. I think they both involved exposure to radiation. Nobody had thought that he was exposed. And then around the same time, Robert Novak of Crossfire fame on CNN, the right-wing pundit, yeah, he also got brain cancer around that time. And so some people I was emailing with, John Hankey was one of them, the filmmaker, Dark Legacy and others. He was saying, well, maybe they're working that way. They take one from the left wing and one from the right wing, so there's no pattern or anything. And but yeah, it's kind of rare. And then I've heard more cases. There was I think a professor at San Jose State who came down with brain cancer as well. So I'm hearing more and more such cases. And when I first read about it with Ted Kennedy, it sounded like it was quite rare. But given the number of cases I've heard of, maybe I'm just paying more attention to it now, and that's what's going on. That's just sort of anecdotal from my very limited experience. But if they have these weapons out there, that's a correlation, at least, if that's what they're causing. I know Marvin Gaye's father, years and years ago, shot Marvin Gaye, the singer, Let's Get It On fame. And he had Marvin Gaye's father, had a walnut-sized tumor in his brain, and that apparently changed his behavior to make him much more hostile, and ended up shooting his son to death. The famous singer, very talented, and also politically active, Marvin Gaye. His album, What's Going On, was a very political album for the time, and those were pretty political times in the late 60s, early 70s, when the Vietnam War was still going on.
So indeed, the studying of what brain cancer, the tumor mass, puts pressure on certain parts of the brain, causing these disruptions in typical personality. Okay, this is all part of the patent that I was referring to. Henricus Liu is the fellow's name that developed this, and then assigned it to different divisions of the U.S. military. DynCorp for one, Raytheon another. These are things that, if you follow the money, are these people just going to sit there and not experiment with these things, or see how well they work by a targeted individual? I submit that's what's crazy, to think that they're not going to do it. So yeah, the bottom line is Alex will be going back out on the street after 6 months. He'll be out in October. I fear that he's just going to go back into the TI, targeted individual problem, and unless we can get him the heck out of Dodge type of thing, I think he should really leave the Bay Area, frankly, and get someplace where he can be really protected. I think there's really something going on there, but people say I'm paranoid, Sterling. People say I'm kind of nutty.
Well, well, I wouldn't say that, but the Bay Area is awfully nice. One of your producers, Dominic, said he lives around my neighborhood. We're both in San Jose here in the Bay Area, and it is a nice place. You're an hour's flight from Las Vegas and a few hours drive from Reno if you like the gambling and show lifestyle. And then we got mountains nearby, and of course Santa Cruz, and get down to Huntington Beach. So the Bay Area is awfully nice. We got beaches and mountains and gambling hubs, and there's some legal gambling here in San Jose, but not sports gambling yet. And so there's quite a variety of activities. We got the Sharks, San Jose Sharks, and the Niners and the Raiders for a little bit longer before they go to Vegas, but they'll only be an hour away. So it's a nice place to live. But I understand you've got connections and are broadcast in the Philippines, and more of my colleagues are retiring to the Philippines. Apparently your dollar goes a lot further over there. And that's where we get a lot of our nurses from. So if you're going to retire, maybe they have a lot of nurses over there, because we seem to keep importing nurses. I used to do immigration law, and quite a few cases involved nurses coming over from the Philippines. So maybe it's a good place to retire too.
Jump in there.
Get him set up.
You bet. Burdock knows that well. Go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place. So you can take 1,000 pesos, which is $20. I throw that in my wallet, and I find myself going 4 or 5 days with $20 in my wallet. You know, it's an incredible place.
So I've never been with Alex, but it's similar to Vietnam in that way, because you get about 23,000 dong. That's their monetary unit, the dong, D-O-N-G. You get about 23,000 dong to $1, and I remember having a perfectly fine a French meal, French restaurant outing with wine and 3 courses, and for 2 people, and it was well under $20. So the Far East seems to be a good place. See, what you do is you earn your retirement in the Bay Area, where I'm unionized in my college shop. So the union works for you to get a nice Bay Area retirement figure, and then you don't spend it in the Bay Area. You go off to the Far East, someplace where your dollar goes much further. So more and more of my colleagues are doing that.
Yeah, if we could get Alex on a telecommuting basis, with the Bay Area dollars, that would be great. Except his work is hands-on, so he's a master of building stages, and so that he has to be there to physically hook it up and supervise all the people. So we need to just, I don't know. We'll do it slowly. Getting him out is the best thing, and then move forward. Certainly, we'll look at what we can do over here at the Goldwater to help him out in any way.
Well, I wish him well, and I'm sure he's got so many supportive friends. I'm hearing that I'm sure he'll land on his feet.
Well, yeah. Let's jump into what you authored here with this book, Professor Sterling. Yeah, golly, what is your take on, again, you're teaching philosophy now to these young students, and hopefully it's helping them think critically, not telling them what to think. I see some of your communications to me through the emails. I like, you're presenting both sides of an argument, getting them to not believe what you want to teach them, but letting them think it through and letting them try, and philosophize what's actually right and what's spurious. So tell us, why would you, lead you to write this section of the book about the moon landings? Why is it, I guess what I'm saying is, why is it important for us to understand truth or lies?
Oh, well, it's never been more important. I guess the stakes are I guess, always ramping up and getting higher and higher, especially in the nuclear age and in the information age when people hack into all sorts of private information systems. So, and being able, with so much fake news, being able to engage in critical thinking and distinguish fake news from the truth, it's never been more important as far as I can see. And I don't tell them what to think, although I do opine. I mean, I'm a professor, so I do profess things, especially if they ask me. I don't want to appear evasive. I teach them that they should ask questions, and especially questions of authority figures. And for better or worse, the sole teacher in a classroom of 40 or so students. I have 44 in one class and 42 in another class. Right now I'm teaching 2 classes. Sometimes I'll teach 3. And so I get questions about what I think, or, I owe them what the best argument is. If I think something's the best argument, and I give them an explanation why I think it's the best argument. And I always invite their views to point out flaws, something I've overlooked. It's very easy for me to do. I have 114 different topics on my syllabus for them to choose from to write their term paper on. So they've got a wide variety. And I don't have set views on all 114 topics anyway, so I wouldn't be able to indoctrinate them even if I wanted to on all 114 topics. But I'm not into indoctrination. I'm into giving them some skills, critical thinking skills. We learn 47 different fallacies. I have a handout on that. Eventually I'll get around to putting these in a book. I have some other textbooks like the business ethics textbook. In fact, my colleagues give me a hard time. They joke around saying, Sterling's actually my first name, so feel free to call me Sterling. I think you mentioned Professor Sterling. It's Harwood's my last name. I got one of these 2 last names, so it's, I get that all the time, Mr. Sterling or Dr. Sterling. So my colleagues give me a hard time. They say, you teach business ethics and you teach all these religious arguments about whether God exists. That's a common term paper thesis. And they say, well, imagine, you're making pretty good money here in the Bay Area teaching business ethics and teaching beliefs about God. But imagine if you actually taught about things that actually existed. If business ethics doesn't exist, then God doesn't exist. They razz me. So they're just trying to give me a hard time. But I teach about everything from Bigfoot and Chupacabra and creepy critters like that, and Loch Ness Monster, to arguments about UFOs and the JFK or RFK or MLK assassinations, and to political and moral issues like abortion and euthanasia, affirmative action, gun control, and so forth. So it's quite a wide-ranging course, and a lot of them like the true crime arguments too, like who killed John Benet Ramsey and why, and whether OJ was framed for a crime that he did commit. That's one theory. So
interesting.
Be framed for, yeah, they seem to have sprinkled some blood around with detergent in there. And last I heard, we don't have detergent in our blood. But he may have committed the crime anyway. They were just trying to make extra sure or something by sprinkling a little blood around there. So that's one theory that we entertain. So it's a very wide-ranging course. So why lunar landings? Well, I kept hearing about it. It's the conspiracy theory that wouldn't go away. And Mythbusters had a show about the moon landing myths. And I was impressed with some of the things that they did, like on the shadows, explaining why the shadows need not have been parallel, even though there was only one light source for them on the moon. They didn't bring any lighting equipment with them, as you can imagine. It'd be pretty heavy and bulky, and they would need a power source, and so that would take power away from other things that they needed power for. So they just relied on the sun for the lighting. And so you'd think with only one light source and being as far away as the sun, although I know there's some controversy about that too, but if it's as far away as standard science says it is, then it basically should act to produce parallel shadows. But they did a pretty good job at talking about the regolith, the particular qualities of the lunar soil and rocks, and they created their own replica of the lunar landscape, and they were able to come up with shadows. So they did a pretty good job on that, but they clearly made mistakes on other things. I saw a documentary film called Did We Go by Aaron Ranen, R-A-N-E-N. It's about 80 or 90 minutes long. It's a very fun film. This guy goes to Neil Armstrong's hometown in Ohio and goes to Cincinnati and some places where Neil was educated and where he had friends and neighbors still. And he was trying to debunk these theories that we didn't go to the moon. And he said he couldn't do it. At the end of the film, he says he was about 75% chance. He was 3/4 certain that we landed men on the moon, but that he was really kind of disappointed. He wanted to really do a slam dunk and eliminate all reasonable doubt, but he couldn't do that. And I saw him later on the Geraldo Rivera show on Fox, where he was even more aggressive, saying that we didn't go. That's my understanding of what he said on that show. So he had become even more emboldened in the years since he released his film. And my students were more and more questioning the statistics that I give in the book with citations. I always try to cite any kind of factual claim that I make in my articles and books. And so 20%, that's from the Mythbusters show, 20%. And Time Magazine also says it's about 11% with about 9% undecided. But Mythbusters says 20% of Americans doubt that we landed men on the moon. And, of course, it's very topical now because tonight is the premiere, the opening night for First Man, the Neil Armstrong documentary, or not documentary, I should say, but biopic and biography of Neil Armstrong, and a major motion picture with Ryan Gosling in the lead role. Note, by the way, that the name of the film is First Man. That's the same as Neil Armstrong's autobiography, which is rather lengthy. But he doesn't say First Man on the Moon in his biography. He says First Man. And I don't know if he's being modest or he just wants to stay out of trouble. And I was just puzzled also all these years. I was a stamp collector as a child. This is way before the internet or anything, when you could just download pictures of the stamps and save them in a Word file or something. But I actually liked the artwork and everything of the stamps. And I was 10 years old in 1969 in July. I was 11 the next month. But and Neil Armstrong just coincidentally died on my birthday on August 25th. But I was 10 years old, and so they released this stamp, and that was cool. It was a colorful stamp, but it said First on the Moon. Didn't say First Man on the Moon, but it said First on the Moon on the stamp. And it didn't have Neil Armstrong's name or face on it. And all the other stamps that I was aware of that were about people and what people did, they had the name and the face on it. So that kind of struck me as weird, even as a kid. And then years and years went by, and I found out that the rule is you have to be dead before you can have your name and face on a stamp. So, okay, that explained that. But then Neil Armstrong dies on my birthday 6 years ago, and still no stamp. And so what's that all about? I mean, he's obviously the greatest explorer of all time, or certainly right up there with anybody, the greatest American explorer of all time. We usually put Americans on U.S. postage. We do have a few foreigners there with William Shakespeare and Alfred Hitchcock and so forth, but mainly it's American. So why doesn't he have a stamp with his name and face on it? It just struck me as very strange. And so I started to look into it and read more about it. And a friend of mine doesn't believe we went to the moon. His name is Asher Robertson. And he turned me on to a whole series of YouTube videos by a guy named, an Australian named Jarrah White, Jarrah, and last name White, the usual spelling, right, with an I, not with a Y. And that was really eye-opening. He's really got quite a few arguments. So, and then of course the flat earthers were coming up on YouTube, and so my students started asking about that. Kyrie Irving, the point guard now with the Celtics, came out and said that he was a flat earther, and so a lot of flat earthers think that we haven't gone to the moon either, because the pictures from the moon show a spherical Earth. So they like to say, well, those were phony.
Well, have you heard about what Kyrie Irving just did recently?
Yeah, I think he apologized. I saw for kind of disrupting science teaching. So
at the Forbes 300 Expo, he comes in and it's like a prepared statement where he didn't apologize for believing the Earth, that he was wrong when he said the Earth was flat. No, he apologized for publicly saying it. He said, I realize now this is a conversation for intimate circles, basically. And he says, the reason why I have to say that is I apologize because of all the science teachers that sent me harsh letters saying, you want me to redo my curriculum I've been teaching for 20 years? And then Adam Silver comes on, right, and says, well, both Mr. Irving and I went to the same university, Duke University, but obviously very, very condescending, says obviously Kyrie attended different classes than I did.
So Adam Silver, he's the commissioner of the NBA, right? The bald guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I commented to some friends about that article, that think I'm nuts to even consider flat Earth. I don't consider myself either way. I just want to say here's questions that I think should be answered. I'm waiting for answers, okay? And yet to even entertain that thought, they think you got to be literally crazy or nuts to do that. And so I'm saying, do you see the problem with Kyrie Irving? He's financially bound to, because of his position as a basketball star, to not rock the boat. And that was the issue. The sin is not him saying it. The issue is the method in which he declared it, that people can't handle that. See, that's the bigger story to me.
Yeah. It is. Well, we do that all the time in philosophy. We ask people to question their most fundamental beliefs, and we pride ourselves on that. We end up getting killed once in a while, like Socrates, but we ask people to question whether the current religious beliefs are correct and whether there's any God at all. And so if you're going to question fundamental beliefs like that, pretty much everything's on the table, except maybe the logic that you use to try to get the solutions, your basic logical categories and basic mathematics and 2 + 2 = 4. If you brought those things into question, and you wouldn't really have any logical basis for answering anything. But but a lot's on the table in philosophy. We question fundamental beliefs before breakfast, or certainly before lunch, and there are plenty of things that we feast upon in the evening, like whether God exists and whether there's a meaning to life and what it is. And so I try to encourage my students to get writing, because I say, yeah, you can write about flat Earth, and if the standard picture is right, and I'm not a flat earther, I would deny flat Earth, but I think it should still be given a hearing. If people want to write about it and talk about it, I think that's fine. But I keep encouraging them to write about it, because I say, well, this has got to be one of the easier topics. I mean, you don't have to talk about some other supernatural world. I mean, you just have to look up at the moon maybe, and you see a crescent moon, and it sure looks like the Earth's shadow is circular, or you can make arguments like that. And there are photographs, and then you can try to get into the photograph and see what makes that photograph phony or not. I think it was April 1992 issue of Life magazine, back when Life magazine was this big oversized coffee table magazine. There's a huge color picture of the Earth, and of course it's spherical. And so, but of course, some people argue that it's phony. But these days, you can kind of use various software programs to detect the phoniness of photographs. And so, if you could show that a cover photo on Life magazine from 1992 was phony, then I think you got a scoop. So I encourage them to write about it.
And so,
go for it.
What
I don't feel threatened by it.
What came of that? Is there any evidence that was phony? Or
No, I'm just saying that sort of thing can be done is by people more technically skilled than I am. But Asher Robertson, I'll ask him to apply himself and his techniques. He's a forensic document examiner, and so he looks for forgeries and signatures and photographs and seals and stamps on legal documents, especially real estate documents. I worked with him for years on real estate cases, and I know he's sympathetic to flat Earth, and he denies that we went to the moon. And for the record, I don't deny that we landed men on the moon. It's clear that we have equipment, and even the Soviets put equipment on the moon. In fact, that's one of the mistakes that Mythbusters made that I mentioned earlier. I'll try to be specific when I accuse people of making a mistake. They said that we were shown to have landed men on the moon because we have a laser reflector on the moon, and you shine a laser from Earth and hit the laser reflector and it bounces back. And because we know the speed of light, we can calculate the distance at that moment that the moon is from the Earth. And actually the moon's moving away from the Earth, which is a bit unusual given how gravity works and how planets form and everything. But it's moving away from the Earth at about a half an inch a year. But anyway, Mythbusters said that we landed men on the moon because must be men who put the laser reflector on the moon. But actually the Soviets have a laser reflector on the moon too, and they don't even claim to have landed men on the moon. You can have machines placed on the moon without having men on the moon. And one of the major arguments against men landing on the moon, or women, humans landing on the moon, or even chimps and dogs, as they used to use. The Soviets used to use dogs and German shepherds, I believe, and the Americans used to use chimps to test some of the spacecraft and the forces in orbit and whatnot. The Soviets don't even claim to have been on the, but one of the major arguments, but they have a laser reflector there, but one of the major arguments is the Van Allen radiation belts would be fatal, or it'd be too risky anyway of having fatal contact with them, with those Van Allen radiation belts. And so you can send machines through that, and if you insulate them enough, they wouldn't harm them, but they'd still be able to function. So that I got into all those arguments. I think I have 25 arguments in my article in the book, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. And I number them for easy reference. And I found an article from, I like to shop on eBay for old publications that the library doesn't have, even on microfiche. So there are, and that are not available online. And there's one called the LA Free Press, as an underground 60s radical newspaper, made it into the 70s too. And they had an article from November of 1969 that denied the moon landings. And these were like mainstream astrophysicists, and I named them in my book. L.J. Wilcox was the main one I relied on, but there were about 4 others named too who backed him up. And he just did the math, and he said the thrust, based on the specs that NASA had released to the public, the thing couldn't fly that much weight and achieve orbit. It didn't have enough thrust. And he's got the calculations and everything. And so I scanned them and put them in the book. I got permission from the original publisher. They're still around, believe it or not. And they're online now. But at the time, I didn't know. I was searching through eBay for old stuff. And so that happened. July 20th was the lunar landing, and by Neil Armstrong in Apollo 11. And then in November, so that would be just 4 months later, there's this article debunking the whole thing. So that's pretty quick work. So, and these are mainstream astrophysics. Like one was at the University of Colorado at Denver, I believe, and they were all from mainstream universities or colleges, and they named names. They didn't put it in as an anonymous criticism or anything. So they could have been sued for libel because they were saying these things are fake. And of course, somebody could have sued them for libel, but as far as I know, no one ever did.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny how people react to this whole discussion. I just we have listeners of the show who I know personally and talk to me, and they say they just like to throw this out to get people start to get their blood pressure up and get hacking and gasping, just kind of like heckling them. And so I got to tell you, I just I don't know if you knew or not. I just came back from Germany. I flew there.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I went to Germany. We took the eastbound flight to Munich out of Dulles. Of course, I'm watching as we come over the ocean, the Atlantic. The North Atlantic, as we go over that part of it. Of course, it looks to me like as we go east, the land and or water underneath us is going at the same speed as it is coming back, right? I mean, we leave at 3 in the afternoon from Dulles. We don't get to Munich until 10 o'clock in the morning, right? So we lose the 8 hours minus the flight time. But on the way back, we leave Munich at 10 in the morning, and we land in Chicago O'Hare at 2 in the afternoon. And so we don't really lose a day at all. We gain it back as we fly back. Of course, we know that's jet lag. But here's what I was thinking about this as I'm in the back of the plane coming home. So I'm one of the last ones off of this wide body 777, right? And I come in and here's the pilot and co-pilot, saying goodbye, being, doing their adieus.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
And I said, the pilot, he had a lot of gray hair, he looked be late 60s, maybe mid 70s, and I said, wow, it was like you've been flying the friendly skies or, United, for quite a while. And he says, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm due to retire after 35 years in a year or so. So yeah, I says, well, thank you, congratulations, and I appreciate taking care of us so well. And he said, well, thank you. And I said, can I ask you a question? You have just a minute. So I broached the subject of being all the time in the cockpit that you've had. You've got to be seeing some incredible things. You fly at night, you fly during the day. You've got to. That's your job. You've probably seen some things. He goes, oh yes, we've all of commercial pilots can tell some stories, and we do among ourselves, right? Basically, you're not part of the club, so I can't really talk to you more about
it. It's the Kyrie Irving
yeah. And so, okay. So I said, let me just, this whole jet lag thing, it's amazing that here the sun is still pretty high in the sky here in Chicago, yet when we go eastward, we lose almost a full day, 8 hours. He looks at me and he goes, so, yeah. I said, so it appears to me that it's not the Earth spinning underneath but it's the sun that's moving. What's your thoughts on that? As a pilot, and he looks at me, and his eyes twinkled, and he says, "You're not going to bait me into a flat Earth discussion."
But he knew where you were going with it.
Yeah, immediately he just cut me off, and about that time, the flight attendants, bless their hearts, they vamoosed. Oh, we don't want to stick around listening to this guy, So they just like politely went away, and that was okay. I said, well, I'm serious about it's not a flat Earth discussion. I just want to know what your thoughts are about simply that we have airspeed, lift, the miracle of this massive plane even rising because it's the motion of the air underneath it, right? And yet the air is the same if you go east or west, right? He goes, yeah. He says, listen. He said, listen to me. He says, I can tell you just one thing. He says, and this is what, if I were to go on the record, but I'm not going to, but off the record, he says, the moon is what bothers me. So we discussed the moon. He says, I'm just going to tell you that in our private discussions among pilots, we always banter up that the moon is not where it's supposed to be at 36,000 feet. And that's that's the bone he gave me. Have a nice day. Have a nice day, sir. So here I am waiting in Chicago to get the flight to Denver and then to Utah, right? So I got like a 2-hour layover. And so I sat down with my laptop and I says, what did he mean by that? So I Googled up something like a United airline pilot and moon questions on flights. And I just put some item. It's just something generic in the search engine. And what came up was I was a retired airline pilot talking about the moon being in a different position than what you see on the ground. Okay, and he does his calculations of geometrics and yada yada. But there was this was very clear. He basically intimated that, for instance, at 36,000 feet, given the seasonal positioning of the moon, based on all accounts, that, for instance, the moon should be directly overhead of Queensland, Australia, yet you can still see the moon in the eastern sky as you're flying eastward. He said, now, under the global Earth, that's directly opposite of us on the other side of the globe. You shouldn't be able to see the moon at 36,000 feet. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's what this pilot was referring to. He says, okay, here's a bone to chew on, but I'm not going to go on the record. The moon.
He just raised the puzzle. He's not going to get in trouble by raising a puzzle in a whole conversation with a passenger just to pass the time. So he can do that much at least.
Yeah, and so have a nice day. Have a nice day. But, you know,
there's a lot of funny things about the moon. You know, they crashed a couple of spacecraft into the moon. I think one of them, maybe both of them, were Apollo spacecraft. Crashed them into the moon. Not the one with the men on them, of course, but and they crashed them into the moon, and the moon reverberated for about 45 minutes the first time, and then they did it again because they couldn't believe that the moon would reverberate like that. From just this relatively small spacecraft crashing into it, and it couldn't be at that high a speed. I guess those spacecraft are moving at about 15 to 25,000 miles an hour, but it's so small you wouldn't think it would have that much effect on a big planet. And the way planets and planetoids like the moon form, you'd think they'd be more concentrated in the middle because of gravity pulling everything together, and so it gets more compacted towards the middle where the gravitational force is greatest, because there's more mass there and it builds on itself to bring more matter in and so forth. So it causes kind of a vicious cycle and concentration of the more dense materials get crushed into the
which brings us to the big question: what is on the dark side of the moon? We only see one side of the moon. Is it really a spheroid? What really is the moon? We'll talk about that at the top of the next hour. Sterling, we've got a break coming up real shortly.
Okay, sure thing.
You can take a few minutes sabbatical there, and we'll come back.
Right,
I want to talk about Elon Musk, SpaceX, the Japanese billionaire that's going up not with photographers but with artists. They're going to be drawing pictures, right? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Okay, sounds great. Okay.
So yeah, let's. I want to talk also. Nixon, you say was most of this happened, if not all of it, during Nixon's abbreviated administration.
All of it, yeah. Land, yeah.
Isn't that amazing? There's a reason why he's really tricky, Dick.
Yeah.
We'll take a short break. We're back at these messages. My guest tonight, Sterling Harwood. So the story behind the story. Don't go away. Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
download it to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
What the heck is the truth, Jihad? Hey, I'm Kevin Barrett, host of Truth Jihad Radio. Federal prosecutors, Department of Homeland Security agents, and curious passersby often ask me, just what is this Truth Jihad thing anyway? Well, everybody knows what truth is, but jihad is a misunderstood term. Jihad means effort or struggle. The greater jihad is the struggle to be a better person, while the lesser jihad is the struggle to defend the community. Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, did say that the best jihad is a word of truth flung in the face of a tyrant. And that's what we do here at Truth Jihad Radio. Every Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, 5 to 7 Pacific, right here on Revolution Radio.
Looking for a nightcap to fill your listening needs? Come join us on Spaced Out Radio with me, Dave Scott, right here on Revolution Radio. Monday through Friday for 3 hours a night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we will take you down the supernatural path. From ET contact to the paranormal and all of the spiritual, cryptid, and conspiracy stories in between. You can find us right here on Revolution Radio, at spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter at spacedoutradio, and on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show. Spaced Out Radio. It's a night of talk and interaction. Are you experienced?
Let us play with all our toys and let us think that way.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically autonomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday at 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, the doctor is in. The doctors are in. My guest tonight, PhD Dr. Sterling Harwood, joining us live from the Bay Area, California. Yes, again, and folks, as we begin every second hour, let me just remind you, this radio station, there is no commercials. We aren't bugged by commercial breaks trying to sell you something and this and that. There is no corporate advertising here. We just simply have a podium and a microphone, and we just simply tell the story. If you like the station, if you like the story behind the story, and as well as the Professor Jim Fetzer's programs that he does a great job with, on twice as much as I am. I believe he's doing a great job. I hear a lot of good reports. Simply help with some donations, folks. The station just needs to pay bills, and that's all. It doesn't need a whole lot of money, just some. So subscribe to the archives if you can. If you can help out, that's all well and good and well appreciated. And they'll give you something silver in your pocket to help along the way. So it's all there as you go onto the click on donate. You'll see what you would get in response. We need your support, folks. The station does need your help. Okay, golly. As we went in the first hour, I want to just really dig into the meat of your article there, and I also need to spend some time on what you wrote about the Beatles, because that is, to me, pretty thought-provoking and as well.
Well, thank you.
I say that was well done. I want to just. I was during the break. I was checking my emails. I've been so far behind in them, and so every second I have, I went in, and Trader Ash, your friend.
Yeah, Asher Roberts.
Yes, he commented on my post to you concerning this SpaceX situation, right? Let me just share with the listeners. This is an article on space.com talking about things of outer space, yada yada. And the headline is SpaceX will fly, that's SpaceX from Elon Musk, right? His company will fly a Japanese billionaire, parentheses, and artists too, exclamation point, around the moon in 2003. And I quote, this was posted on September 17th of this year. And I quote, a Japanese billionaire and a coterie of artists will visit the moon as early as 2023, 5 years hence, right? Becoming the first private citizens ever to fly beyond low Earth orbit, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk announced tonight. This is the 17th of September. Yusuke Maezawa, the founder of Japanese e-commerce giant Zozo, has a sign-up to fly around the moon mission aboard SpaceX's BFR spaceship rocket combo. He and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk announced during a webcast September 17th from the company's rocket factory in Hawthorne, California. The mission, which will loop around but not land on the moon, could be ready to launch in just 5 years, Musk said. Quote, ever since I was a kid, I have loved the moon, Maezawa said. Just staring at the moon fueled my imagination. It's always there and has continued to inspire humanity. That is why I do not pass up this opportunity to see the moon up close. But Maezawa will not go alone. He said he will choose 6 to 8 artists, from painters and sculptors to fashion designers and architects, to share the experience with him and ultimately with all of us. The artwork that results from this week-long #Dear Moon mission will, quote, inspire the dreamer inside all of us, said Maezawa, who is an avid art collector. He's launched a website now called dearmoon.earth, https://dearmoon.earth, just for the project. And what's funny is right below this article is Yeah, an artist illustration of SpaceX's big Falcon rocket launching into space. So why do we need to have any more artists? We already have the artwork here, and of course it's we discussed this over the year or so, Sterling, that we have whistleblowers that have confessed that they have made the the composite artwork for NASA of all things in outer space, and they say because it simply has to be. Has to be. Well, nobody really digs into that. I submit and say, why does it have to be? Maybe because there is no such thing as a space flight. Maybe, going back to Walt Disney Studios and their 1950s uh, videos of space launches going around the moon is really what's really happening. So tonight we are the premiere of First Man, the story, is hitting theaters. You can bet it's going to be critically reviewed and raved about. But I submit, listeners, if you go and watch that Neil Armstrong show, look closely at the photography, and then ask yourself, what about the movie Capricorn 1? And what about Stanley Kubrick's what he was saying as he let go the Eyes Wide Shut movie and then was conveniently not around after that because he was intimating that he had a lot more to tell about what happened with the moon launching, the Apollo missions. Folks, the movie industry is so able to make you believe and see the footage that's going to be showing in Neil Armstrong's story, this First Man show. Wow, it's got to be real. Look at how well they did this photography. They did this. It's graphics, ladies and gentlemen. It's just flat out artistry. It's artist work. Your comments, Sterling. Go take it on.
Okay, yeah, you got a lot of threads in there to pull on. So, well, one thing is, Hollywood. It goes back even further in Kubrick's work. He's one of my favorite directors, by the way. If you go back to The Shining, he's got a little boy who has The Shining, which is the spoiler alert. The Shining is the ability to have ESP knowledge, and the little boy's wearing a sweater at one point that has Apollo 11 on it, and then there's a room 238. That's a different number than the room number in Stephen King's novel on which the film is based, and there is no room 238 in the hotel. It's supposed to be a haunted hotel. Spoiler alert. And if you haven't seen The Shining, which came out about 1975, and Capricorn 1 came out about 1979, as I recall, a very good film. Not by Kubrick, but a good film nonetheless. So the 238 refers to the 238,000 miles away that the moon is, and it says room number. And if you some of the things in the movie are reversed, and if you reverse them, like red rum means murder, and then room number, I think if you rearrange, it's an acronym for the moon, roughly, at least anyway. So room number 238 is moon 238,000 miles. So that's the fantasy room that the Jack Nicholson character goes into. But anyway, he got some special camera lenses from NASA, and of course he's famous for filming the quite realistic for the time anyway, 2001: A Space Odyssey, based on the novel of the same name by Arthur C. Clarke, who was the inventor of the telecommunications satellite in real life. And so there are these interplays between real science and Hollywood that are quite interesting. And so Kubrick got these special lenses that he was able to use from NASA, and they wonder how he did that. What did he do in return? Did he do a favor to them, and did he shoot some of the moon landings? As far as the colorization and the graphics on the photos of the Earth and the photos of various astronomical objects, NASA has admitted that those are colorized often, and I guess they think it has to be in order to grab the attention of young people. Their education is part of their mission. So, and my friend Asher Robertson had noticed that the continents are too big or too small on some of the photographs of the Earth, but that might be because they just want people to be able to recognize some of the forms through the clouds for educational purposes and see that it's the Earth, not just some blue marble hanging there in space, to use the expression that Carl Sagan, also from Cornell, used. I think he put a book out called The Blue Marble. So, the how they could have duplicated it, it's suggested. Also in another Hollywood film, it's suggested the James Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever, with Sean Connery, who's the best Bond for my money anyway. And Jill St. John, the fabulous redhead, curvaceous redhead, is James Bond's love interest in the film. He goes crashing through the evil villain's lair, and when he comes crashing through in a golf cart or something, or a moon buggy, I think it is, he comes across them filming another Apollo landing there. And so it's meant as a bit of an inside joke, I take it, that the producers wanted to touch base with that possibility that the moon landings had been faked on a studio set right here on Earth. So it comes up from time to time in these movies. So The Shining, there's supposed to be heavy symbolism in there. And then you're right that Eyes Wide Shut was the final completed film by Stanley Kubrick. He did some work on the film AI, and that was finished off by Steven Spielberg, I believe. Another great director, very famous, of course.
Yeah, so I mean, you got a Hollywood and Disney Studios, Michael Eisner coming in and filling the void after Walt, the 33rd degree Mason, passes away. I'm stunned at the old footage. As a kid growing up, Sunday nights was Disneyland night. Okay, we watched Wonderful World of Disney and just loved the shows. I remember seeing, remember that old series Lost in Space, right?
Sure. Danger, Will Robinson.
Yes, Danger. And so there was one episode that I remember vividly as a kid, because Walt Disney brought in this robot that looked a lot like that robot on Lost in Space, and they were talking about the reality in just a few years of man going to the moon. It was quite amazing, because I'm just saying, wow, can we really do that? And so it really piqued the interest. But then, not knowing anything as a kid, right, just being so believable and gullible, here's this exotic sounding director of the space agency, Dr. Werner von Braun, telling us. And so with Dr. von Braun being, his hair slicked back with whatever gel he used, he was in his nice suit. Talking in his German accent about the incredible reality of space travel. Well, in your book, okay, and I should say Fetzer's compilation, and I suppose he didn't go to the moon either. I look in the back of the book. There is a whole. I got to tell you, this is the Zundel trials, the Appendix D. That's there, right? And then it talks. Yeah, I had a chance to interface in 2002 with author David Irving, and there's a section in the book there on page 452. The British historian David Irving enjoys great prestige. Zundel thought of asking him to testify in this second trial, but there was a problem. Irving was only partly a revisionist, right? Meaning the Holocaust, the story, right? Mm-hmm. The thesis that can be defended, for example, in Hitler's war can be summed up as follows. Hitler never gave an order for the extermination of the Jews, at least up to the end of 1943. This is in his book, Hitler's War, right? Mm-hmm. And I have a signed copy of this in my library because David Irving I was at a book signing at the Jacob Javits Center, right kitty corner to David Irving's book when he was doing Hitler's War, and there must have been 500 or so Orthodox Jews picketing and they were very loud, very shouting. They just shouted down anybody that tried to come and talk to David Irving. And so I noticed that, and after hours, after the doors had closed and the picketers had left, I came and said, "What in the world is going on with you, sir? You know, I'm an avid fan and reader of anything historical on World War II, and his book was incredibly nice, thick pictures, full color pictures in the middle, well done book with a cover jacket." And Mr. Irving says he was so agitated because nobody was coming to his booth. I mean, he says, "I'm," and he's British in his British brogue, "I'm a historian. I'm not a bloody politician," he said, right? And he was so adamant. He says, I'm just. He says he explained to me that he had access to the Moscow libraries that where Hitler's papers were taken after World War II, because the Russians were the first in and took a lot of private papers. So, and all he was doing was showing Hitler's correspondence. There's actually photocopies of orders. It was absolutely his story. I mean, he gave me a copy, signed it, autographed it for me. And I got to tell you, I dived into that book and I was shocked. I was so shocked. So here, I just find this interesting. In the back of the book is a whole section on David Irving, that in fact Irving was extradited to Munich, to Germany, and served time in a German prison for putting that book out. Okay, as did Ernst Lindell. Ernst Lindell. Good heavens! You talk about mind police and thought police when you can't even publish historical documents.
Right. Yeah, Germany has laws restricting freedom of speech. They don't enjoy the freedom we have here. Even in Britain, they don't have the freedom of speech that we have here. When I was in Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner on Sunday, where people get up and say pretty much whatever they want to, but a Bobby came up, that's what they call their police over there, with the big hat on and the badge on the hat, on the cap. And this guy was making racist comments about a black speaker and offering him a banana if he would shut up and stuff like that. And finally, the guy got a little over the top, and the Bobby just looked over at him, and the guy knew it was time for him to shut up. So all the Bobby had to do was to glance at the guy, and he stopped harassing the speaker there. So as part 4 of the book, it's not just that appendix. There's an entire part, the 4 main parts of the book. I didn't have anything to do with that part of the book, and in fact, I disagree with it. I think the Nazis probably killed more than 7 million Jews in the Holocaust, but it's not something I've studied closely. But I just think that the 6 million figure doesn't include things like people who died prematurely later or committed suicide based on the experience. And just given all the success that the Nazis had after the war, like Werner von Braun, he was a Nazi and it was covered up for years. And not just a Nazi, he was an SS officer, and not just an SS officer, he was the runner of a slave camp. And and true, maybe they don't, I think there is one document that they claim is orders from Hitler. I'll have to send you a reference to that. I don't have that off the top of my head, but they did find one memo signed by him that the people claim is that. But anyway, if you read Mein Kampf, German for My Struggle, and all the nasty things he says about Jews in there, it's certainly not a stretch to think that he wanted to have Jews exterminated, and he was the dictator, and nobody's going to be spending all that fuel and gas and everything else they use to kill Jews without him knowing about it. And if he were to disapprove of it or not approve of it, I mean, they used a lot of resources to kill 6 million, or I think over 7 million Jews in the Holocaust. So if he's a dictator and he he knows what's going on because all the information feeds to the top. And he wrote all those nasty things that you can read for yourself in Mein Kampf about the Jews and how diseased and morally degenerate they were and everything. Certainly, people are not going to take the time to be making lampshades out of skin and make all that of tattoos and stuff like that. Here's
the point. Here's the point, though. Here's the point that David Irving brings out in the pages. There's a chapter on the Valkyrie assassination, okay, and the paperwork that went in. And I didn't have a chance to really follow up with it. I'd love to because of the things I've read since I first met and got David Irving's book. There's a book put out by a number of great historians called The Secret Backers of Hitler. How did Hitler actually come into power? How did he have the funds to rise from the like a phoenix out of the ashes? Okay, when you have such hyperinflation going on in the 1920s in the German Weimar Republic, and yet he has the money somehow to build this incredible war machine that was pretty much amazingly close to conquering the world. So the question then becomes how the Secret Backers of Hitler shows the money being transferred from the House of Rothschild in England vis-a-vis the Jewish banking firms, Cohen-Lubin Company and others in New York City. So there's another book that shows the familial history of Adolf Hitler and how his mother and grandmother were maids in the Rothschild Bavarian mansion there, and was pretty much strong evidence that there was an illegitimate son born from the maid, which was Adolf Hitler's ancestor, his mother or grandmother. Okay, so here's what I wanted to ask David Irving, and I pose this to a number of individuals. My travel companion made it clear to me, do not talk about this topic in Germany, because if anybody overhears it, you may not be able to leave the country. Because this is.
Well, you can talk about it, but you have to take one side, and then you're out of trouble. But if you take the other side, then you're actually subject to their laws. I read John Toland's 2-volume Adolf Hitler book years ago, and he estimated the odds that Hitler was Jewish. Actually, Schicklgruber was the family name, I believe, or it was Hitler. And apparently, she was Hitler's mother was a maid, and apparently there were 4 people in the town that John Toland, Toland, and he's got a book out from the 70s, I think like around 77 or so. And by the way, I dated his daughter one time at Cornell. She went to Cornell too.
Wow.
I think her last name, her first name was Tamara, I think, or Tamika or Tamara. Anyway, she was very nice, and she helped me get my first publication. Actually, she and got me paid $200 for a science fiction story called Benedict the Worldly Trader, which was in a science fiction magazine. I think it was volume 2 of Visions magazine put out by Cornell. So it was the first time I made money on a publication or had something published. So in any event, he estimates that. And I think one of the main arguments in the book is that in part 4 of the book, again, I had nothing to do with writing that, but I have read it. And there's a Red Cross, International Red Cross estimate of how many Jews there were in Europe before 1939. And the estimate is a lower amount. I think it was only something around 500,000 or more, but anyway, it's way less than 6 million. And so I think they're relying pretty heavily on that one estimate by the International Red Cross. But of course, the Nazis were masters of propaganda, and you can't take one source uncorroborated on something as controversial as that. How easy would it be to take some of these billions that they were throwing around with this war machine and spend it not on, and they were great on films in terms of the production values of their film, not great in content. Obviously, I'm a huge opponent of Nazism. But how easy would it be to bribe some international Red Cross official to erase a 0 or 2
sure.
some reports they put out? So, and the first casualty of war is truth. First casualty of war is truth. So during wartime or leading up to war, you got to be on your guard for propaganda.
Right.
Right. So I don't accept that at face value. It's one data point among many other data points, but
let's assume
and other people did a lot of documentary films of the bodies and so forth, and of course they didn't count each individual body, but there sure are a lot of bodies.
Let me jump in. Sure, I'm not even saying for a minute that there wasn't Jews killed in the concentration camps. So sure there were at least hundreds of thousands, and that's a tragedy. 6 million. Well, okay.
In part 4 of the book, they had 500,000.
Yeah, let's look at what the thread I was trying to point you to here, and that's the fact. Let's assume that this book by Warburg and others, The Secret Backers of Hitler, is factual. I mean, Warburg is Jewish himself. There's no reason to make it up. But I'm here to tell you, folks, there is subsections of Jewry that are very, that are against each other. There is a non-Zionist faction of Judaism that really doesn't want to believe we should be even be a Jewish home state in Palestine. Now, I say this because you look historically back, and David Irving was, what his book was incontrovertible about, was pointing out that a number of the highest SS officers that were part of that inner core were Jewish themselves. Okay, but they were a subset of Jews, like George Soros. He comes out and admits that during the war years, he actually, as a Jew, would pinpoint other Jews to go into the concentration camps. What was Soros doing with that? He admits that publicly. My point is this. In 1819, there was, in fact, an international meeting of the so-called Pale of Settlement Jews in that part of Europe, which includes southern Russia, the Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, et cetera, et cetera. They met in Hamburg, Germany, and it was a 3-day conference. The whole conference was the idea of Zionism. This is 1819. Okay, years ago there was a lot of information about this Hamburg conference and the debate of whether the Pale of Settlement Jews, which are primarily Ashkenazim, Khazars, right? They're not really. They know they're not directly bloodline of Abraham in the first place. They understand that they have a religion. They like to be in peace. They basically took a vote in 1819 and issued what's called the Hamburg Proclamation, that they say the Pale of Settlement Jews are not blood of Abraham. We are here. We're living a religion of Judaism with our own language and our own customs, etc., etc. We are going to strike from our prayer books any mention of returning to Palestine and establishing a Jewish state. Now, immediately after that 1819 conference, the strong proponents of world Zionism, specifically the Bauer family, according to the historical documents I've perused, changed their name from Bauer to the Red Shield or Rothschild, and the Rogenfeder Jewish clan changed their name, moved to New York City, and the Rogenfeders were intermarried with the Bauers. They were interrelated by marriage, and they changed their name to Rockefeller and took on a crypto-Jewish Christian persona. But the funding of Adolf Hitler, going into those cycles of looking back in historicity, comes from these very rabid Zionist Jewish families. So just suppose that Adolf Hitler was particularly designed to make war against and liquidate as much as possible those Pale of Settlement Jews who were rabidly anti-Zionist. that's what I wanted to say. And I think the historical documents of David Irving and even Ernst Zundel would show that that's exactly what happened. Any historian that's honest will say that there would not be a nation of Israel today if there was not World War II. Okay, if the wandering Jews that were so persecuted and in concentration camps, they needed a new homeland. So you have Lord Balfour in his declaration. You have the British Parliament, which is again jumping to the tune of the House of Rothschild in the City of London, right? You have everything working, and you have Truman and all the rest of these leaders just bow down to Wall Street and saying, "Fine, let's get it done." There would not be that without the fallout of Adolf Hitler in World War II. I submit that's absolutely factual. I think it's exactly what happened, and it's
well, let me give you at least a supplement, if not a substitute, explanation for how Hitler got his money. And of course, you can get money from multiple sources. I don't know if the documentation. I haven't read the sources that you're referring to, so I'm not qualified to talk about them. But there's a wide. When you get to millions of people in any kind of group, of course, it's going to be a mixed bag. I mean, there are self-hating Americans, and there are traitorous Americans, and there are patriotic Americans, and you can find a wide diversity of views among any group that has millions of people in it. So I don't think that that's going to go very far. But the thing about Union Bank, there is documentation that J. Edgar Hoover cracked down on Union Bank, which was run by the Bush family, among others at least. I think the main family running the Union Bank during World War II was the Bush family. And in the movie Dark Legacy, which is streaming on Netflix by my friend John Hankey, who's a retired educator in LA, and he documents Hoover's crackdown on the Union Bank because they were shown to be trading with the enemy and financing a lot of the Nazi war efforts. So at least some of the money.
And Prescott Bush was convicted under that. Prescott Bush was in fact convicted.
We have hard documentation, and he was a millionaire at the time, so he had a pretty good criminal defense, and he still got convicted, right? So that's pretty good document, and he had to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt because it was a crime to trade with the enemy. So one of the Bush family, I think, did get convicted because it was the basis for closing the bank down. And you don't close a bank down, without having some evidence, although they might be during wartime, you have special powers, and I guess you could try to open it back up. But I think the wartime prohibition against trading with the enemy, it requires evidence. So we have very good documentation of that. I don't know about the documentation that you're referring to, but you're good to be specific and name your sources to the extent that you did. You gave names and dates and places, and people can look it up, and we can read it and decide for ourselves or have a follow-up show. So I commend you on being specific, but I really am not in a position. We were going to talk about the Beatles.
Let's shift gears and let's talk about probably the most.
There's a link because Wernher von Braun, who was head of NASA during the moon landings, and Nixon, as you mentioned earlier, all 6 moon landings happened during the Nixon administration and during the first Nixon administration. And then Wernher von Braun was head of NASA during all 6 moon landings. And an interesting thing about him is he went to Antarctica, of all places, in 1967. And Antarctica is a place where you can pick up moon rocks right there without any mining or any much effort. I mean, it's effort to go there, but right on the surface, black, when these meteors come in, they get blackened from burning up the outer layer, being burnt up in the atmosphere, outer layer of the rock that's coming in the meteor. And so you can see the black rock against the white background of Antarctica, and you just go over and you can pick them up. You can pick up the moon rocks. So a lot of people think the rock solid evidence that we went to the moon is that we've got all these moon rocks, like 800 pounds of moon rocks plus. And but you can actually pick them up on Earth in Antarctica, and the composition of the moon rocks is really not that different from one layer of the Earth as well. So the mere fact that we have, and of course you can have machines pick up rocks as well too. So it's not the slam dunk argument, but if you track the movements of this Nazi Werner von Braun, he goes to Antarctica before the moon shot in 1969. He goes down there a couple of years earlier in 1967, and that just happens to be the place where you can pick up moon rocks. So I just thought I'd drop that. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it there.
Well, it's also the location of New Schwabenland, the Nazi enclave that is shrouded with mystery. With, remember, Operation High Jump with
Admiral Byrd.
I mean, there's a Russian documentary film on what really happened there, and the Nazi technology in New Schwabenland pretty much licked the high jump fleet, according to the Russian documentary. Pretty amazing stuff. Something happened there.
America never acknowledged what happened, so and I wouldn't want to rely on the Russians as my only source of information. I'm sure you can understand that.
Well, during that time, though, they were allies and they shared the information. There was actually Russian envoys along with that, because they were trying to mop up this is the mop up operation to the last supposed holdout of Nazi Germany. The basic fleet of Admiral Byrd's was being prepared to go, and invade Tokyo when the nuclear.
Yeah, they did pull out. It's documented that they pulled out early, and some strange things happened to Byrd, and I think the son of Admiral Byrd died under mysterious circumstances. I think it was his son. It's not his son, it was his grandson. I think it was his son. He was supposed to testify before Congress, and then he was found dead, I think partially clothed in a warehouse or something,
Mm-hmm.
the day before he was supposed to testify to Congress. So that's another weird thing that needs to be investigated. And I heard that at I went to the second Ancient Alien convention. I'm not saying I believe in ancient aliens, but I do find the whole arguments about it fascinating and good fodder for critical thinking. I think it's more interesting than the argument that people are being abducted by aliens today and stuff. All these UFO sightings after about 1935, I just put down to commercial aviation or balloons, and now we've got drones and we've got secret military flights. And so all the new UFOs I just put down to military operations or people shooting at fireworks or drones or something. But the ancient stuff where they're moving 200-ton blocks up off the ground, and they don't have any horses in Peru to do it. They got llamas, but I don't know how a herd of llamas is going to help you move a 200-ton block up off the ground and stack it neatly, a bunch amongst the other ones in these megaliths. So anyway, I like to talk about all that stuff, and so I went there, and one story told there was that I think it was the son of Admiral Byrd, who was also in the Navy, died under mysterious circumstances. So that's something you might want to look into at some point.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Exactly. So
what
let's
the Beatles?
Yeah, we can't beat the Beatles. We gotta tell us what the story. What is this about Paul McCartney? What's going on? Tell us. This was to me, as I read this, I said, "Oh my goodness, wow!" Tell us the story.
Well, I don't think Paul is dead, so let me get that on the record. I'm not denying that we did the moon landing, and I'm not denying the Holocaust, the killing 6 million. In fact, I think it's more 7 million Jews. And I'm not denying that Paul McCartney is alive either. So, but it's just not as slam dunk as you might think on the moon landings and on the Paul McCartney story. In fact, Paul McCartney had an album out last month called Egypt Station, and it's actually one of his better albums in years. I think his voice improved over one of his other albums I heard recently, like New or something. So actually, I think he's still putting out good music. But the idea was that he died in 1966, either on September the 11th, famous date in history. I think it was also the date that the Maine was exploded too. Wasn't that September the 11th? So a lot of stuff happens on September the 11th, evidently. And so, or on November the 9th, depending on which clue on the Sgt. Pepper album you want to take. If you look at the drum on the Sgt. Pepper album and you put a straight edge mirror up to the middle part of it, it says 111X. There's an arrow pointing up to Paul McCartney and says he die. And so there was a rumor that was knocked down in the Beatles Monthly magazine, which is the official publication of the Beatles, in February of '67, saying that rumors that Paul McCartney died in a car accident were untrue. And so that actually made it into print. They thought it was serious enough to deny it. And there's an old rule in journalism that don't believe any rumor until it's been officially denied. Then you can start.
Right on.
Start believing. When it's serious enough for them to officially deny it, then you know there's something to it. So anyway, and he did get into a moped accident. He admitted he got into a moped accident around that time. So maybe that got distorted through multiple telling, oral tradition going on or something into a car accident. But anyway, he's supposed to be decapitated or burned alive or both. A little hard to be both, I would imagine. But anyway, decapitated or burned alive in an auto accident in September to November. And this is supposed to explain why the Beatles stopped touring, even though they were making millions and millions of dollars. And some of the concerts were only about a half an hour or less. So how difficult could it be? But actually, they were starting to get roughed up on tour. And John, in the Philippines, they got roughed up at the airport because apparently they had snubbed the Marcos family by not coming to some birthday party or something that they had been invited to. And they took off and got roughed up at the airport. And then John made this famous or infamous remark that the Beatles were bigger, not better, but bigger than Jesus Christ, which some religious leaders at the time agreed with because people were spending more time going to concerts and listening to the Beatles music and reading about the Beatles than they were reading the Bible and going to church, for example. So anyway, people took that the wrong way, and they thought that bigger means better. That's the American attitude, especially down in Texas. If it's big, it's good, and the big hats and big cattle and all that. So they got in trouble, and they were getting death threats, and people were boycotting the Beatles and burning their records, and records that would probably be worth millions of dollars today, actually. So they stopped touring. So there may be other explanations for why they stopped touring, but if Paul died, that would be another explanation for why they stopped touring. But then it gets weirder. They replaced him because the show must go on, especially when you're making millions of dollars. You know, for example, they had the top 5 single records, top selling 5 records in a row at the same time. So that's how hot they were. And it's number one album after number one album. In fact, they have an entire album called The Beatles Number One. I believe it's 21 number one singles that they had released, so that they put out years later. So the show must go on. So they replaced him with someone named either William Campbell or Billy Shears. There are different versions of the story. And he turns out to be pretty good, but not so good that they could go touring. He's supposed to be a little taller than Paul, noticeably taller. So I don't know why they couldn't put lifts in the shoes of the other Beatles, or just have him crouch a little bit or stand behind something. Some sort of display or something, some flowers or something to disguise it. And then also, here's the thing that got me interested in it, is that his eye color changes. If you see all the early reports about Paul McCartney when they really hit the fan on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964 and the American tour, everybody says Paul McCartney's got these chocolate brown, dark eyes. And they're beautiful. He's got the puppy eyes, and they go on and on about it. And then in 1967, the Beatles release a film. Originally, it airs in black and white, so nobody notices anything. But then it comes out in color, and it has a close-up, extreme close-up of Paul's eyes. And what color do you think they are? You think they're dark brown, chocolate brown? They are not. They are light green. And I looked it up, and color contacts did not come in until about 1973. And no one's ever said that he had a prototype or anything. But, it's filmmaking, and, it's not exactly Hollywood. These were films made in England. The Beatles made all their films, I think, with English production companies. But, it's Hollywood-type stuff going on. And so maybe he's I don't think they had the technical abilities to make it look light green in the close-up when it was actually dark brown. So, but then it turns out I got an album called The Beatles Story, which was a documentary that Capitol Records put out about the Beatles. And it says there that Paul's eyes are hazel. And so hazel, if you look up what hazel eyes means, it means it can change color. And so apparently that's what happened. And people didn't realize his eyes were hazel because nobody wrote on all of, like the Topps put out, the Topps chewing gum company, the bubble gum company that puts out the Topps baseball cards. Well, they put out Beatles cards in 1964. That's how popular they were. And they didn't like insert it with baseball cards. They sold them separately as Beatles trading cards. And so I think there's like 64 or more cards in the set. And there are multiple sets too over the years, I think. So, but one card, I think it's card number 2, says that, and it lists on the back basic facts about Paul. And they say he's like 5'10" or 11. They say his favorite meal is beef, which has changed obviously because he became a vegetarian. And it says his eye color is brown. So on the trading card it says brown, and in a lot of these fact sheets that were passed out it says brown, but then you see green. But then on this record, which is put out by his record company, they say hazel. So maybe that explains it. Rather than an imposter who came in with green eyes, it's really the same Paul, and he just has an eye color hazel that changes back and forth. Because it would be pretty damn hard to find a left-handed bass player who's as talented as Paul McCartney. He could just step right in there in 1966, and then you produce Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and Abbey Road and Let It Be, 4 of their best albums ever. 3 of my favorites, especially. I don't care for Let It Be quite as much, but those are great albums, Abbey Road and White Album and Sgt. Pepper. So, and even Let It Be is quite a great album too. So what are the odds that they're going to find another musician who could take Paul's place if he died? And what would be their motive for covering it up? I mean, if they announced that he died, I think people would start buying a lot of records, because that's what happens when Aretha Franklin dies and Michael Jackson dies. They buy a lot of records. So why would they put all these? And there are a lot of clues, like this drum I told you about. There are a lot of clues in their music, like hands over Paul's head, and the Sgt. Pepper album itself is a grave site. And the old Beatles are all dressed in black, and the new Beatles are dressed in psychedelic army uniforms. So, and definitely it's a new style of music, psychedelic music. There's a little bit of psychedelic music at the end of Revolver with the song Tomorrow Never Knows, but Sgt. Pepper is a massive break in the style of music. So some people think, well, that's because they have a new member of the band who's writing most of the songs with John Lennon. But it could just be because of the influence of drugs and also LSD and marijuana and other drugs. And it could just be just the changing nature of the times, that the Beatles changed with their times. And in Haight-Ashbury and Laurel Canyon and California generally, the psychedelic music scene with the Jefferson Airplane and acid rock and the Grateful Dead, that was all coming online. And George Harrison actually went out to visit Haight-Ashbury to get a sense of things, and he said he was disappointed. It was really just a Bowery. It was a bunch of people who were filthy, like Pigpen, Big Brother. Yeah, he was disappointed at how unclean everything was. People were just hanging out on the street, homeless and so forth, and using.
Well, I did an interview years ago with Dr. John Coleman and his book, The Committee of 300, where he has a whole section in the book about the music industry and the Tavistock Institute's goals. It's kind of interesting that Coleman doesn't connect the years of the Beatles' popularity, like you just said, with the Moon Apollo landing hoax with Werner von Braun. Is there a relation there or not? Is it?
Oh, no, I wasn't saying that was the relation. I was talking about the relationship between the Holocaust and the Nazis with Werner von Braun.
Yeah,
the Beatles. Oh, with the Beatles, yeah. I don't know enough about the Tavistock Institute. I'm still researching them, but there is a military intelligence link to several artists down in Laurel Canyon and in California. Jim Morrison of the Doors, his father was an admiral in the U.S. Navy and was in fact in charge of one of the ships in the Gulf of Tonkin Institute. What are the odds of that happening? And Graham Parsons' father was a major, I think, in the Air Force, and there's several others. I think one of the members of the Mamas and the Papas, I think one of their relatives was in the military. So you just, you wonder about these things if they're just coincidences. But if they go on and on and on, you have one right after the other. And then you have some of them silenced, like Jim Morrison died under mysterious circumstances in France after he had been hounded out of the country on this indecent exposure charge in Miami, Florida, I believe it was. And then Graham Parsons dies. But, it was a hard-living time where people were experimenting with drugs, and they were not legal drugs, so there was no standard quality control, and people could get overdoses, just like today with the opioid crisis. This, what is it? Starts with an F. There's a particular type of drug that phenytoin or something. I forget what it's called, but since I don't do drugs, I'm not that familiar with it. But there's a particular type. It's not phenobarbital, but it's like fentanyl. Fentanyl, is that it? Fentanyl sounds right. Mm-hmm. They gets mixed in with these opioids at a higher degree. If you get them off the street, even one dose can kill you. It's very easy. And apparently Lynn Bias, when he did cocaine and had an overdose, that particular batch of cocaine was much more concentrated than other types of cocaine. So if you're taking drugs illegally, you don't have the quality control that you would if you were taking it under scientific or medical supervision, for example, as an experiment. So it could have just been that these people died at a high rate, and some of them happened to be from military families. But I'm looking into it. I'm seeing if there's some sort of link there. Dave McGowan wrote the book Laurel Canyon. I think Weird Scenes Inside Laurel Canyon is his book. So that's where your listeners start looking into this phenomenon.
Well, yes, and fentanyl is right. But look at the origins of these drugs. Look at the origins of LSD. Okay, and Timothy Leary, U.S.
Army.
Yeah, U.S. It's exactly right, and ties into the CIA too, as what's happening there. It's experimentation, folks. Tavistock and what Dr. John Coleman says, it's just they're just trying to see how they can manipulate minds and the general persona. I think there's something to that.
Better. They were trying to get something better than sodium pentothal, so they thought maybe if you trip out on LSD, you'd cough up all the Soviet secrets or whatever.
I interviewed a lady that during the Haight-Ashbury years went on some LSD, some wild trips. And she said some things that was pretty amazing about what she saw concerning some people in uniform and what they really were when the LSD was working. And it was funny because not only did she see it, but 4 or 5 people that were on the same trip with her saw it. And they did. When you're off the LSD, you don't. They look normal human beings, type of thing. It was an interesting interview I did with her. Are you gonna believe a junkie or an LSD head? No, there's something to it. Going back to the links that John Coleman put out about, again, the overarching rationale for it, and it's again you look at Nixon years and the whole moon landing things. Good questions, interesting questions, of course, that demand answers, I submit. Just like, I'm glad you know John Hanke. I got to know him as well. I loved his documentaries on JFK and JFK Jr.'s assassination. I shared with him my insights into that and my story behind the John Jr. situation. Mm-hmm. And he looked it over.
He's got dark legacy. He went mainstream. Had so much success with Dark Legacy that it's streaming on Netflix. So he's totally mainstream. Even though it's a very radical video, but they're right there on a mainstream platform of Netflix. So I encourage people to check that out. And he has a documentary on John F. Kennedy Jr., very suspicious crash of that aircraft as well.
I invited John on the show again. He just sent me an email talking about his documentary coming out on Donald Trump. Well, we're out of time.
Thank you so much. Thanks again.
We didn't hear much from Maine, Philippines. Talking to him next week. God bless.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thanks again.